back to my channel. My name is Katie, and today we're going to be talking about the first chapter of your book. A strong first chapter is so important to establishing your story and orienting your reader in your world like exactly how you want to. It's very important and it's very difficult. I'm pretty sure there's something out there called first chapter syndrome, or I'm making it up, I don't know. But we all know that feeling of like when you want to start that new project but you just cannot start. It's just stuck and you're kind of afraid because you want to do it perfect, but you also kind of have no idea how to start, and it's just a frozen feeling. We've all been there. So today I'm going to talk about my tips and advice for how to get unstuck, / if you're not stuck, just some ideas for first chapters. Some advice on how to make it good, and then I have some tips on where to start like in your story and how to start, and like some scene ideas. So we're going to talk about all of that in this video. So I'm going to stop rambling and get right into it. My first tip is to avoid cliches and generic beginnings, such as the character waking up and going about their day, or your character looking in the mirror and describing their appearance, or a dream sequence. Never start with a dream sequence. Honestly, never do a dream sequence, period. But especially, never start with a dream sequence. It's really disorienting, and the daily routine trope and the looking in the mirror trope are just boring. The reader doesn't really care. Not to be mean, but you know, imagine you picked up a new book and it's like describing this character's morning routine. You're like, I don't know you, I don't care. You can maybe get away with like a daily routine or like a waking up and getting ready sequence towards the middle, like when things are starting to change, and you can show how things are changing by little things in their routines. But try not to start with cliches or generic beginnings. It's like an immediate turnoff for readers. Try to be creative and try to like grab their attention right from the beginning. I'll give some more tips on how to do that later, but yeah, just try not to be too cliche. My next tip is to not let the opening scene like drag on for too long. Like that first intro paragraph, try to move into a scene very quickly if you're gonna start with like a thought. Like a lot of books start with like an eye-catching line, and then there's some sort of like monologue that goes on, and that's a great way to start. I love books that start like that because you're like, what is this monologue? What's happening? And the first line is always like attention grabbing, but try not to like monologue for too long. Try to jump into a scene pretty quickly, because the monologue will grab the reader's attention, and then if you jump into an exciting scene, like you'll kind of intrigue them by your character's mind, and then you'll intrigue them and orient them in the world by doing a scene, and I think it's a really good combination for a first chapter. Yeah, just don't monologue for too long and don't scene for too long. I just use scene as a verb. For me, when I write first chapters, I try to do a good balance of scene and inner dialogue / monologue. You don't want to like info dump on your reader, but you also don't want to give like no information about the world and the characters. You want to give a little. Don't let anything drag out. That will be boring. Try to find that balance, if that makes any sense. A mistake that I see a lot of writers make in books is sometimes with that beginning monologue where you're trying to be kind of profound, it can be like pretentious or bad or cringe because it's too poetic. You know what I mean? Like, we've all read that book where you're like, what are you yapping about? This is obviously like easier said than done, but try to be intriguing and poetic, but also keep it simple. Like, don't do the craziest, fanciest prose and use crazy metaphors. Again, all of my tips end in the same thing of like, try to find a balance between having that like poetic intro and not overdoing it. But something that I will say is sometimes I will see a book that like has a really like poetic and like prosy, that's also not a word, but you know what I mean, like really purple prosy like first chapter, and then that voice like never comes back. and it's really weird. It's like they were trying to be like mysterious and like fancy for the beginning, but then it went away. So my thing is, if you're gonna be pretentious and like have like the craziest prose and use like big words, do it the whole time, you know, commit. Like if that's the vibe of your book, like, you know, where the reader needs to have like a dictionary open next to them, then definitely like keep that consistent, if that makes sense. But if you're writing like a little romance, like you don't have to be like poetic. I mentioned info dumping briefly earlier in this video, but my next tip is just don't info dump. There's very like inconspicuous ways to slip info that would be dumped into your first couple scenes in like an elegant way. There's a way to do it that works, such as in dialogue or just in like setting description. You can kind of sprinkle information in a like classy way. You don't have to just info dump and start your chapter with like, welcome to planet whatever. The weather on this planet is always bad. The planet is purple when you see it from, like, no, let me stop you right there. Info dumping reads like amateur writing, and none of us want our writing to read like amateur writing. We want people to think that we know what we're doing, even if we don't. I love sprinkling info in like dialogue, like your character's mother works at a bakery. Your character can come downstairs in an early scene, and maybe their mother is like in the kitchen baking up some new recipes, and your character's like, what are you doing? And then their mother would be like, testing some new stuff out. Name of bakery, wants to add some new recipes. That alone establishes that that's where the mother works. She's a baker, that's the place that she bakes at, and she bakes at home and is kind of like a flowery, frazzled mess. You can establish like facts about your story very quickly and easily and effectively like that. It doesn't have to be a whole like info dumping thing. Also for me, when I read a book that has info dumping, I'm like, I feel like they think that I, as the reader, am stupid. I've definitely had this problem in my writing where I'm like, oh, I need to like mention, like, I need to mention this again because what if the reader forgot? Readers are not stupid. They can read between the lines, they can understand like the intent behind things, and they remember things, and they can put the pieces together. Like, you don't have to explain everything, if that makes sense. So try not to info dump and try not to over explain things. It makes readers feel stupid, and it makes the writing feel amateur-ish, and it's just not really fun to read. Also, really quickly on this same point, if your character has like a traumatic backstory, don't like dump it all in the first chapter. Slowly reveal little nuggets over the entire course of the story. Maybe not the entire, like maybe reveal the trauma like halfway through, and then the last half of the book can be them, you know, growing and changing in that character arc. But don't like be like, my parents died when I was 6. Oh, a slow leak of information being revealed is so much more rewarding to consume as a reader, because I love when a book keeps me guessing. That's what keeps you hooked, is that you don't know fully what's going on and what's gonna happen. That's why you keep reading. So no info dumping, no backstory dumping, no over explaining. My next piece of advice is to set the tone very quickly, like first line. You need to be establishing the vibe of your book. Like if it's more lighthearted, you need to keep that in mind. If it's more like a heavy, dramatic, poetic kind of book, you need to establish that. You really need to like set up the theme of your book like with the reader. I like when I kind of know what a book is going to give me reading experience wise by like the end of the first page. When I write my books, I like to kind of establish my character's voice, their thought process, their humor, like the way that they see the world. So like establish kind of what your character is going to be like, at least at the beginning, because if you have a character arc, they should change a little bit, but establish kind of whose brain we're gonna be in, and then also establish like what world we're gonna be in pretty quickly. Like in my book, June Gloom, that I'm writing, it's like a summer romance-y vibe, and in the first chapter, I have my characters go to the boardwalk. I establish that there's an ocean, there's a beach, and you know, the waves are lapping, there's seagulls overhead, there's cute little shops lining the boardwalk. I like to establish kind of where we are very, very quickly, along with the character voice. And when you do those things at the same time, it really, really does a great job at like orienting your reader into the world, making them understand like what they are about to read. Like by the end of your first chapter, your reader should be like, I know what this is. It should still leave some like intrigue into what's gonna happen story-wise, but they should be like, I know what this is. This is gonna be a funny, cute, vibey rom-com. That's what I want people to think when they read mine. Yeah, think about what you want your readers to perceive your story as and establish that very early on. My next tip is to introduce the conflict of your story very early on. I like to do it at the end of chapter 1. Now, this doesn't have to be like your inciting incident or like big event yet, but establish some kind of conflict. Up until this point in this video, I've just been talking about like orient them in the world and establish the vibe of the story, but you do also have to hook them into the plot. So I like to introduce some kind of conflict in chapter 1 because that will keep them reading. So like if the inciting incident of your story is your character develops superpowers, establish in chapter 1 that they feel like they don't have anything special about them. They don't bring anything to the table. And that way that will hook your readers into wanting your character to feel like they do bring something to the table, and so they'll want to keep reading to root for your character. And then when they do get their superpowers, it'll feel very rewarding because you established that inner conflict very early. Another common mistake that I see is the writer starting chapter 1 too early or too late in the storyline. Here's like kind of an example from my brain. This isn't actually from a story, but this story starts with the character running late to work, and then when they get there, they get fired. And then by the end of the chapter, they end up meeting this random person who offers them a job. And kind of like during the running late portion, the author describes them like getting on the train and running late and panicking. We could have honestly, like in this story, we could have started with the first line of the book being, you're fired. Imagine you like open a new book, you're super excited to read, and the first line is like, you're fired. Dialogue tag, you're fired. And then describe the thought process of your character and that they were late and that they've been working this job forever and that they need this job. Because when you read like, you're fired, it's like, wait, why? And you want to keep reading. When I start a book and it's like, I'm late for work, it's like, okay, does that make like any sense? Don't start your first chapter like too early, but also don't start it too late. Like in that example, like what if it had started when the character got the new job offer? We needed kind of to know that she got fired and that she was late, and we needed to know all that, but we don't really need to know all about her being late. Did I like explain that right? Make sure you pick like a good starting point in the story, like in the timeline to begin the plot line. If you start too early, it can be boring. If you start too late, your reader can kind of feel like they were left out of something. Yeah, or like if you're gonna start with a fight scene, start like the first line with like your character getting punched in the face. Don't start with them like getting ready for the battle. It'll be more intriguing if you start right in the action. I think that's what I was trying to say, is starting in the middle of kind of like the action of your story creates for a much more gripping and fast, intriguing start. You know, I don't always know what I'm saying on this channel, but I get there. I get there eventually. Now I'm gonna give a few examples of ways to start your story if you're not quite sure how to begin. Like if you don't have an exact timeline planned, I'll give some examples. Number one, I'm gonna say start in a fight scene, because I just said that. So yeah, start in the middle of a fight scene, because your reader will be like, whoa, 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 like why are we fighting? Who are these people? I love when books start like in the middle of like an action scene. It's always super interesting and super intriguing, and then kind of like when the fight scene is done, you can kind of, in that aftermath while your characters are calming down, you can explain some lore, you know? But I love a good fight scene start. I also love opening with a conversation. This is a good way to sprinkle some information about the world and about the characters into like the dialogue. You know, start with like two characters walking their dogs together down the sidewalk and talking about something that just happened or is about to happen to kind of establish where we're at the story. Number 3 is kind of obvious. Start with like an important event in the story. If I'm back to the superpowers thing, if your character is going to gain superpowers, maybe start with that scene where they gain their powers. Now I know that that's like obvious, but like most like superheroes gain their powers in like a traumatic, crazy way. So starting with that like action and that intensity of that can be very gripping for a first chapter, you know what I mean? And then my final little idea for how to start is if you're writing like a romance or just like a book with romance in general, you can start with the meet cute or like an awkward interaction between the two love interests. You know, just jump right into the rom-com vibe. Like if your characters meet by running into each other literally in a coffee shop and spilling coffee over each other, maybe the first line of your book and the way that you start is like, hot coffee glues my t-shirt to my stomach, the liquid dripping down onto my pants, a hot, sticky, uncomfortable feeling. Like start with like the collision. But yeah, you can start with a meet cute or an uncomfortable situation. This can be a good way to establish the comedy in your book if that's what you're going for. And also, like in the coffee spilling scenario, we can kind of get to know how the two characters are gonna handle that conflict. But yeah, long story short, long video short, first chapters are very important and you should always start at the right time with the right scene that's really going to both pull your readers in and establish the world at the same time. A good first chapter does both and balances it well. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Sorry that this video was a little bit more of like a rambly one. There's not a lot of like concrete advice you can give people about it because every story is different. So I was just kind of rambling, thinking out loud through certain points, but I hope it was helpful nonetheless. If it was, you should like the video and comment to let me know that I should continue to make writing advice videos like this. You can also comment any video ideas that you want to see from me. Also, subscribe if you feel like. I post writing content, obviously, writing tips, writing vlogs, stuff like that, and then videos about reading, such as reading vlogs, book recommendations, stuff like that. So anything to do with a book, from writing it to reading it, I talk about it on this channel. So if that is up your alley, you should subscribe. I post once a week, sometimes more. But yeah, other than that, thank you again for watching and I hope you have a really great day. And good luck on that first chapter. Ugh.